Hey everyone, I'm finally excited to have this roof pillar and door jamb repair video prepared for you. Today we're going to install new door jamb hardware, install a new door jamb, install a roof pillar, cut and install lower quarter, grind weld smooth, and complete the spot welds. First part of the hardware is we're going to refurbish this door striker. There's a little tab that holds the door striker screw holes in. I'm going to cut that off and see if I can get some of this gunk off of it with a torch. As you can see, the torch trick always works well. When my door jamb was installed, the striker plate that you see in this video, it was seized solid. I couldn't move it up, down, left, or right. That was due to all of the gunk that was around it. But when I cleaned it off, what I saw was there's actually serrated edges. But on my striker plate, it's very worn out. So I'm going to use this body hammer and the rough edge to create another serrated edge. I made 4 of these washers. And started welding them to the striker plate screw holes. I used a very thin stainless steel washer, so I doubt in the future this will give me any problems. With that being said, I'm not planning on having the door removed at any time soon, so this should be solid in place for years to come. So to finish this piece of the striker plate, I'm going to have to weld on that back tab that holds the screw holes in place. But until then, I'm just going to center it between the door jamb holes so that when I put my tab on, it gives me the most amount of adjustment possible without being too loose. I had to bend this little tab in the vise. It was no big deal to make. I used the same body sheet metal thickness, 18 gauge steel. And I'm going to weld this on. I just used a few spot welds on the side. Nothing fancy, just to hold it in place. After I was done, I used some ceramic paint, only because that's all I had left from when we painted the outside, as you see here. Next is this beautiful little 90-degree fitting. This was all rotted out on mine, as if you're doing this on yours, I would imagine yours is too. The best way that I could figure out how to fit this in was to just mark it with a permanent marker, figure out where I needed to have it, and cut it with a bandsaw. I'm grinding the paint on the inside edge because when I tack it in place, I'm going to have one spot tack on the inside. There's that bandsaw I mentioned. You want to make sure you're cutting it square, so putting it in the vise is crucial when you're cutting something like this. Plus, you don't want to cut your fingers off. I have the amperage on my welder turned down to 15 volts. That way it doesn't blow through the metal, creating holes on the inside of the door jamb, which I definitely don't want. After I have that seam weld completed, I'm going to get some holes drilled for my future spot welds. Prime those up, make sure they don't rust, and my first item is complete. Now if you remember in the last 914 video, I left 2 screw holes with self-tappers. I'm going to reuse those screw holes so that when my striker plate is installed, the door should shut easily, without any adjustment that is. Next item, check. Next I have to install this roof pillar, so in order to do that, I have to prepare for my spot welds once again. Now you don't see much fooling around in the video here with fitting this in place, but I did take all the proper measurements in between, as you've seen in previous videos, the 35 1/8 measurement in between the pillars. And I do have some self-tapper holes already pre-drilled. There's one here, and one here. Besides that, I'm just going to throw a couple more in it just to hold it in place. Now the only area that I see as a problem is this corner here. I had to undo my self-tapper screw just to line it up for the time being. The self-tapper screw just went back in, as you saw there. Now these edges don't line up perfect, but with a little bit of a body hammer, a little bit of welding, a little bit of grinding, and an auto body dolly, you're able to make this seam look flawless. Here you can see the roof pillar lines up very nice, also with the new door jamb. That's going to need a tack weld when we go to button everything up, but the next item is checked. Now I need to create this lower quarter. This will be the most difficult task of the whole installation. I purchased a piece of 18 gauge steel. I was unable to get satin steel, which is what all the other panels are made out of. But when I go to install it, I'll make sure that the backside is primed. I'm just putting in a couple pieces of blocking to hold the sheet metal in the contour of our body panel. It's not a flat panel, but it's close. So I'm going to use this speaker magnet while I trace out the panel that we need. On the bottom you can see I've left a little bit more steel. It's always easy to cut steel off than it is to add steel. And this extra line that you see I'm putting here, that's going to be for the fold of where the door is. The contour of the body panel is not much curvature, but it is a slight bevel, as you'd call it. So just with a little tiny bit of a bend, I'm able to make that bevel. And when it goes on and welds everything into place, it should easily take its form. Now I used a pair of snips and cut just before that line that we made when we were scribing everything. Now I'm using a pair of vice grips, a dolly, and a body hammer to make that door edge. Here's my coating on the back side. And I'm ready to install. I've saved you the pain of all the fitting that I've done in the previous time. So it does fit in quite nice, but it wasn't easy to get there. First tack I'm going to start with is our door jamb line. And with the door closed, you can see the gap is even. Next tack on the back side. Make sure everything's flush. And start tacking everything into place. I have a wing nut bolt attached here just to pull the door jamb into place. I'll make one little tack to keep that door jamb in place. Button everything up with some tack welds. I don't want to go too crazy yet because I still have to make sure the door closes. Cut and installed the lower quarter. And at this point, the door closes. Now with my lightning speed welding techniques, I'm using a stitch weld to complete all the welds. The stitch weld helps it disperse all the heat so the panel doesn't warp. And again, I have my flap discs. Those always prove well when I'm trying to grind my welds out. And even while I'm trying to grind my welds out, I'm dispersing the heat. The last thing I want is to install these panels and have everything warped. I've ground the weld smooth. Now it says complete spot welds, but I'm also going to finish my welding inside this door jamb. There's not enough of a lip on the door jamb to create some spot welds. So I'm going to be using stitch welding, but I'm going to be using it in minimal technique, which means when it touches the steel, that's when I stop welding. I'll show you in a close-up video in a second. I'm using the back side of my body hammer to get that lip in, being sure that I don't damage any of the body steel. My band sander is just to take some of that satin coating off so that when my welds are going down the seam, they stick a little better. The welder does have enough heat to eat through the satin, but it's just easier this way. It makes for a cleaner weld. Now the video is sped up here, so you can't see the actual real time of how fast I'm using these stitch welds. But when I do the close-up, you're going to see how fast I do it. always make sure I clean off my welds as I go. That way if there's any imperfections in my welding rate of speed or my voltage, I can adjust. Here's that close-up I mentioned. So like I talked about, as the MIG wire touches the steel, that's when I stop. I literally see the flash and pull my finger off the trigger. That's how I'm able to get such a minimal amount of wire on the steel. It makes for a nicer weld when I'm doing a seam like this, and it's going to be a lot less grinding out on this edge. As you can appreciate, and I'm sure you can imagine, this edge is no easy task. The $40 Amazon band sander, I would say that that was one of the best tools I've ever bought for the price that it was. It was able to get in all those little curvature cracks and do a nice fine job while it's grinding away. It doesn't take too much off too fast, but it still does a quick job. And for the big flat areas, it's always best to use those flap discs, in my opinion. With all my major welding done, I'm going to finish off these spot welds. And I'm also using stitch welding while I'm going in these spot welds. If you don't, you're just going to blow a hole right through it. Reason being, if your amperage is too low, it's not going to stick. And if it's too high, you're just going to blow the hole through it like I mentioned. Take out those soft tappers, weld those holes up. And the last item is complete. Here's what the final job looks like. I'm still going to have to do a little bit of grinding on those spot welds eventually. But for now, for the purpose of this video, our tasks are complete. And when I shut the door with ease, it shuts nicely, and all the edges line up almost perfectly. And I say almost because there's always room for improvement. We'll see you next time, everyone.